Okay, so after learning the two different types of ways in which we handle recessionary gap or inflationary gap, classical versus Keynesian, we have to think about what happens with Keynesian and where do we get the funds, right? And how do we move forward? So you either have to focus on government spending or you have to focus on taxes, right? So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at taxes. And what I want to know is that, and what I want to explain to you is a gentleman by the name of Laffer, okay, created something called the Laffer curve. And what it does is it shows the relationship between the percentage of income that is taxed, right? Meaning the amount of our income that we have to give over to the government, and what the tax revenue that the government gets from it, right, is going to be. So if we have 10% of our income tax that's going to taxes, 20%, all the way over to 100, right? That in between, there's a maximum, right, that occurs. And what it looks at is that it says right about 50% is where the government is going to maximize their total revenue. Right? Kind of looks like a bell curve. So right around 50% is where the government's maximum tax revenue comes from. Now, that would be equivalent of you working until July the 1st or June 30th and giving your money that you earn from January 1st until June 30th to the government. We know that we have a sliding tax scale based on it, but you know if they're actually charging 0% of your income as a tax, the tax revenue is zero. You also look over here, and if they're charging 100% of what we earn, we have to give to the government, they will get zero because we'll choose not to work. But what Laffer discovered is that as we go greater than 50%, that it significantly falls off because if we have to give the majority of our income to the government, what's the purpose of working, right? So that's one thing to think about is they know that there's a maximum tax revenue out that they're trying to get to, but really getting to 50% would be difficult as well. All right, so let's look at the other part, right? Let's go back and look at government spending now. So we're going to talk about how does government spend, right, in relationship to the taxes that they bring in. So the money that government brings in is called tax revenue, right? And that's like their income, right? That's a government's income. But then they also have government spending, right? And we could call it could be government expenditures. You can call it a million things, right? But we just look at their spending, and I'm just going to put it as a big G, right? This is just government spending. And that's everything that they're spending money on. Now, they should only be spending what they have enough income from, just like we do, right? But that doesn't always occur. So if we start looking at this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the big G for government spending, and I'm going to show a relationship to tax revenue. Now, if the two things are equal, then we have a balanced budget for our government. Now, in the state of Mississippi, we have to have a balanced budget. It's in our Constitution that we do. Now, we just went through the longest shutdown that we've experienced ever because we did not have a balanced budget. And our federal Constitution does not require us to, right? So we don't have to have a balanced budget here. So many times what happens is that government spending is greater than the tax revenue, the income that they have going on. And if we look at this is called, what do you think? Right. This is called debt spending. If we look at it, you can also refer to it as a budget deficit. Right? And if, for any reason, the government spending is less than the tax revenue, we have a budget surplus. Now, the last time that we had a budget surplus was during President Clinton's era as president. And so ever since then, we've been operating in a budget deficit every year. Now, what I want to talk about for a second is if we have deficit spending, if the government spends more than they're bringing in, every year that amount comes in and adds to what we call our national debt. Now, this week for your journal, you're going to go look what the national debt is, right? And it's going to tell you up to the second. So I want to make sure you put the time that you get it, or you can just screenshot it however you want to. And don't let it alarm you. But every year that just keeps adding to it, right? And we have not been taking care of it and kind of taking money out of it. So remember, if Keynes talks about increasing government spending, it has to come from someplace. And the question is that where does it come from, right? Out here, what are we looking at? And are we going to add to our national debt when we start spending this way? All right, so there's one last thing that I want to cover, and not every president has agreed with doing it Keynes' way. Other presidents believe that in order to get out of a recessionary gap, that there potentially could be another way that the government could be involved, right? And again, this is where we want to be. And if we're in a recessionary gap, we're over here. What some presidents believed in doing was changing the short-run aggregate supply curve. And again, this is called supply-side economics. And you've seen President Trump do some of this time, but the president that's mostly associated with this is Ronald Reagan, right? And what Ronald Reagan did was that he lowered taxes on businesses. Because when he came into president, we had a significant recessionary gap, right? This is where we were. This is what we were producing, right? This is our short-run equilibrium when he came into office. So our real GDP and our price level. But then what he decided is that I don't want to increase government spending here. Instead, let's lower taxes on businesses. And if we lower taxes on businesses, we're going to increase the short-run aggregate supply curve. And he predicted all the way to long-run equilibrium. So our new short-run equilibrium would be here, equals real GDP, equals our unemployment. And at the same time, we would see that price level would actually go down, right? We call that deflation. Real GDP would go up and unemployment would go down, right, as a result of it. Now, this is also called voodoo economics. There's lots of nicknames out there for it, Reaganomics, but this is what his prediction was, is that let's see if we can have that actually occur. Now, President Trump has also done this year. He significantly lowered corporate taxation this year, and we've seen an increase in the short-run aggregate supply curve over the first year of being president, and we'll continue to monitor it. I hope this unit's been great. I hope that you learned something. If you have questions, please post them and I'll be happy to answer. Remember that shooting me a text message is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. As well, you can send me an email and I'll try to check in with those every day. But I will be out of town this next week, Tuesday afternoon through Sunday. But I will check my email every day and I'll have my phone with me 100% of the time. I'm going to be at a conference. But please feel free to let me know anything that you need. Thanks so much, and I hope you guys have a great week.